Chapter 1, Best Friends. He was the one everyone liked. He made excellent grades in school, was handsome and very sociable. He also was very generous, didn't have much, but what he did have he was more than willing to share. If one of his friends did not have enough money for lunch, he would gladly give them half of his. If one of his friends spent the night at his house, he would let them wear his clothes if they saw something of his they liked and would help anyone with their homework if they were struggling. This was how he was in elementary, middle, and high school. The teachers and students alike loved him. There was only one problem: he was reared in a household that was far from financially secure, which came with an accompanying neighborhood that was a breeding ground for various criminal activity. His parents were still together, struggled financially their entire lives, but made the best life they could for him with what they had. They instilled priceless values in him. Although they had very little to offer him monetarily, however, there was a roof over his head, food to eat, and a jalopy they helped him purchase to get back and forth to wherever he needs to go when he entered high school. Nevertheless, these values were manifested in his loyalty, thoughtfulness, selflessness, as well as giving his all in school. There was one of the guys from the neighborhood who he became the closest with. His name was Leon. Leon was reared by a single mother. His father was not around and his mother allowed him to come and go as he pleased. Leon chose to spend most of his time at Brandon's house since his parents loved him like he was their own son, fed him, and allowed him to ride along with the family to run errands, go to the park with them for their family cookouts on holidays or other special occasions. He was the brother Brandon always wanted but never had since he was an only child. Brandon admired Leon for being able to come and go when he pleased, something his parents did not allow, but Leon admired Brandon for having both of his parents still together, the love they had for him and the time they spent with him, something he did not have. In high school, people who did not know them actually thought they were related because they were so close. Eventually, they became very popular because they would come to school dressed nice from head to toe, had a vehicle despite it being a hoopty, while other students were riding the school bus, most notably referred to as the cheese. Sometimes Brandon would even let Leon drive while he relaxed in the passenger seat. Brandon worked at a retail store since the 9th grade, saved his money to buy the things he wanted and shared them as he always did, with everyone else, especially with his best friend. His parents were very proud of the man he was becoming and felt they owed it to him to let him do what he wanted with his earnings since he never had much prior to obtaining a job. They just told him to not spend it all on insignificant material things, and try to save some of it for a rainy day. Brandon and Leon both eventually graduated high school and have more time on their hands. Neither of them ever thought about going to college since their parents couldn't afford it, nor did anyone in their families go past having a high school education. The thought also never crossed their minds to open a business since the only entrepreneur they ever knew was Pee-wee, who did well, but in their eyes, because he did not have a flashy lifestyle, did not earn enough to impress the two young men to want to follow in his footsteps, so neither direction was even on their radar. They were both from generations of poverty. Brandon was lucky to land the retail job in the 9th grade that the neighborhood clothing store owner Pee-wee gave him because he loved his sociable personality and felt he would be a great fit for that line of work, but his buddy was never employed. Brandon had a loyal customer who had been coming into the clothing store every month for years to purchase new attire and would often talk to him about the next trip he was taking out of state, the next concert he was getting tickets for, a nice restaurant he was taking his girlfriend to, and the next vehicle purchase he was contemplating. He would also leave Brandon a nice tip when he helped him in the store. Brandon was impressed by this, although he was able to buy nice clothes since the 9th grade due to having the retail job that also came with a generous discount and had the ability to save up and help purchase his first used car while in high school, but this was a completely different level. It was a lifestyle he had never had the opportunity to experience since his parents were financially unable to expose him to vacations, concerts, various restaurants, or brand new cars. Although the guy had been coming into the store for the past few years and they often engaged in small talk, Brandon finally got up the courage to ask him what he did for a living. The guy responded, "How about I just show you?" Brandon was elated that his longtime customer that he built a rapport with over the years and was always impressed with was willing to take him under his wing. The guy who called himself Ace told Brandon he would pick him up after he get off work later that evening. Brandon told Ace he was closing the store and his shift should be over at about 10 p.m. Ace told him he would pick him up at that time. Closing time finally arrived. Ace kept his word, He was there to pick up Brandon in his shiny late model sports car that Brandon really adored at 10 p.m. sharp, took Brandon to grab a bite to eat, and off they went. He went to 3 different locations to introduce Brandon to the only 3 guys in the city he trusted and did business with. They all drove nice automobiles, had beautiful homes, expensive jewelry, and stylish clothes. Brandon wanted to be a part of that circle so badly, they eventually treated him like a younger brother since Ace introduced him, and they all trusted and highly respected Ace. After leaving, Ace told Brandon that he was a street pharmacist and those were the guys who distributed for him. He told Brandon he would allow him to hang out with him a few more times and he can decide if he wanted to keep selling all of the retail clothing to others while only getting a few outfits here and there, or be the one purchasing them whenever he wanted and actually having somewhere to wear them to on a regular basis. Brandon opted for the latter. Before long, Ace had Brandon doing his deals after work, and when the money began rolling in large sums, he resigned from the retail store he had worked in since high school. Pee-wee, the thin old man who owned the retail store, tried to tell Brandon that Ace is not the type of guy he wants to get mixed up with outside of selling him clothes and shoes. Brandon respected and loved Pee-wee like an uncle, but had a strong desire to live this new lifestyle, which led to the store owner having to hire someone else. Ace began to trust Brandon so much because of how good he was doing, and how he always kept his word. He eventually allowed him to handle larger and larger amounts of his product. He fit right in with the 3 guys Ace initially introduced him to. Brandon eventually purchased a nice new car, jewelry, fine clothing, was taking trips out of town, dining at various restaurants, and finally got his first place, a nice luxurious high-rise riverfront apartment downtown. Leon finally caught up with Brandon, since they had not had much time to really talk in a while, and told him he knew he was not getting all of his new items from just that retail job. Brandon admitted to his best friend that he quit the retail job and had been working for Ace, but did not got around to telling him yet. Brandon was skeptical about mentioning it to his best friend since Ace schooled him on how to always move in silence by not letting anyone know the moves he was making, unless they were part of the small circle who is moving the weight. How not to wear expensive clothes and jewelry around people who can't afford the same thing, how to continue to drive his old car when riding around the hood and only to pull the new car out when he was going out of town or somewhere nice in order to not be a target. However, Brandon did not feel comfortable keeping things from his best friend since they grew up together, were so close, and he felt he could trust him to not tell anyone. Leon immediately knew who Ace was because he was a well-known street guy who had been dealing in large amounts of product for years, and rumor had it that he had a solid plug straight out of Colombia. Leon said he heard some of the guys in his neighborhood talking about him often, and although he tries to be low-key, the streets talk, and people know he's making major moves. Leon and Brandon remained friends after all of these years when many of their other peers went their separate ways. Although Brandon was not spending as much time with Leon as he used to, Brandon allowed Leon to drive his older car sometimes when he drove the newer one he purchased, and when they would go out of town or somewhere nice around the city together, he would get in the passenger seat and let Leon drive the new car, just as he did in high school. He would also take Leon shopping with him whenever he went to the mall. He continued to treat him like the brother he never had. Brandon had all of the girls wanting to go out with him, and Leon was able to ride his coattail. However, although he did not admit it, Leon was slightly jealous, despite Brandon sharing everything with him. Eventually, Leon asked Brandon if he could introduce him to Ace so he could have direct access to the type of money he was getting. Brandon told Leon he would definitely run it by a C and say what he says. When Brandon approached Ace about it, he was told no, he cannot help his friend out since he did not know him personally, and that he only dealt with people he has known for many years, no directly, not indirectly through someone else. Brandon was slightly offended since he thought his word of saying Leon was a trustworthy guy who he grew up with and was best friends with would stand for something. Ace went on explaining to Brandon, that's how people get caught up, trying to let people in they don't know based on someone else's word, and told Brandon to watch the movie Donnie Brasco, which was based on a true story, and he would understand. When he brought the news to Leon, he felt bitter about it and asked Brandon if he told Ace how they have been friends since elementary school. Brandon told him he mentioned all of that, but Ace was still skeptical because he only let people in that he personally grew up with or had a direct connection with for years in some type of way. Brandon explained to Leon how Ace went on saying that's how people get caught up in the movie he told him to watch. Leon then asked Brandon if he could just work for him with the product he was getting from Ace instead. Brandon stated that he did not want to betray Ace's trust or respect by secretly going against him. Leon told Brandon Ace would never find out. Brandon stood firm and told Leon he was not willing to take that type of risk with Ace's product and reminded Leon how he always take him shopping with him, let him drive his car, give him pocket money when he needs it, etc. Leon angrily replied to Brandon, "Man, that's not the same as having your own." Brandon promised Leon if he ever gets his own connection he will put him on. Leon responded with a dissatisfied, "All right, man." Brandon suggested to Leon that he apply for a job at one of the plants since they pay well and told him in the meantime, he would put a good word in with old man Pee-wee at the retail shop for him. Leon looked at Brandon with the side eye and said how he is not trying to be on nobody's job for 8 hours a day when he can work for himself, and how he is not trying to work at a retail shop for minimum wage when he can make at least a few $1,000s a week even in a slow month selling weight. Brandon reminded him how he did it for over 5 years. Leon said, "That's different, you worked there mostly while we were in high school, and we're grown men now." Brandon eventually dropped the subject to avoid any more friction with his friend. Nevertheless, life goes on. Leon and Brandon continue to be friends, but deep inside Leon wanted to be just like Brandon and eventually started feeling distant since he was no longer the one Brandon spent all of his time with. He felt pushed aside since Ace did not trust him coming into the circle. Although Brandon had no control of his boss's decision, Leon still had misplaced animosity towards Brandon. One night Brandon and Leon were in Brandon's new convertible and Brandon was about to drop Leon off after a long fun late night of partying. Leon was commenting to Brandon how they were all on you, man, speaking of the attractive ladies at the party. Leon was secretly seething and had been for several months now, seeing how Brandon was becoming well known as the handsome, nice, giving guy who was doing well for himself, and how he was just the friend of the guy with all the nice things, which only got him so far. Leon asked Brandon to make a stop before he went home. Brandon thought nothing of it and told him sure. They stopped in the parking lot of a clothes store. Brandon asked Leon, "Why are we stopping here?" Leon said that he wanted to talk to him about something. As Brandon began to let the convertible top up while they were parked in the dark, empty parking lot, 2 men in ski masks came running from behind the store and made it to the car before the top closed. One of them put a thick clear plastic bag over Brandon's head. He begins to fight them off as best he could, while unable to breathe. His eyes were dilated as he looked horrified, confused, and tried to reach for his gun in the glove compartment, which he did not have a chance to get to. He realized Leon was in on it as he offered no help while he was fighting for his life after the guys began suffocating him. They went through his pockets, took his jewelry, left his body in the parking lot and jumped in his car, then began fishtailing and burning rubber out of the parking lot. The next morning, a store employee found Brandon's body in the empty lot. Leon was called to the police station since he was reported to be the last one to see him alive after they left the party together the night before. He made a statement of how he was dropped off by Brandon after the party and did not hear from him since. The detectives had no other evidence to go on and had to allow Leon to walk out of the precinct. The funeral was eventually held. Leon attended as if nothing happened and even spoke at the podium about their closeness, years of friendship, and how he loved him like a brother. Several weeks went past. Leon's DNA was found in the car and on the body, which was to be expected since he was with him the night of his death and was often in the car with him. 2 other unidentified male DNA specimens were also discovered. Several months then went past. Leon checked in with Brandon's family periodically, and they appreciated it since they always looked at him as their other son. Meanwhile, the detectives were still on the case trying to figure out who killed Brandon since there were no witnesses and the store's cameras were not functional. They had to wait until they got a hit from the national database to see who the other DNA specimens belonged to, which could take years, depending on if the other 2 men get caught committing another crime that required the collection of their DNA or if there was a long shot one of them would feel compelled to come forward and confess. Several months turned into several years. Ace could not stop thinking about the murder of Brandon, the young man he took under his wing. One day he and the only 3 guys he truly trusted were talking about what transpired that night and Ace had an epiphany. He thought back to the day Brandon came to him asking if Leon could join the crew and he turned the idea down. He never asked then, but now wondered how Leon felt about the rejection. Ace and his three close friends and business partners wondered if there was a possibility that Leon felt guilty and jealous enough to rob and kill his best friend. Since he knew enough about Leon through stories Brandon used to tell him, he decided he would use that knowledge to see if he could get more information. Ace had a couple of female friends he trusted and had known for years who would do anything for him. He sent one of them to Leon's neighborhood where he knew he would be hanging outside with other guys, as Brandon said he always did until he went to pick him up to go somewhere. The plan worked like a charm. The young lady parked outside the corner store Leon was known to frequent until she saw who appeared to be him go in. She quickly got out of her car, and of course she was a new cute face and all the guys were trying to talk to her. She acted interested in Leon after she confirmed which one he was when one of his friends called his name, and he fell for the bait. They exchanged numbers. She would go by and pick him up, and with the money Ace gave her, pay when they went out to eat when he was unable to, and even became intimate with him to get close enough to be able to talk to him about anything and everything just as Ace instructed her to do. Shannon and Leon would have fun together and talk a lot. After a few months, she finally thought the time was right to indirectly ask about Brandon. She eased it in to test the temperature of how he would respond. She lied and said that her cousin was killed in a car accident about 5 years ago, which she blames herself for since she was driving, only sustained minor injuries, how they were so close, they called each other sisters, and how she could not stop thinking about her, even though it happened a while back. She asked him if he had ever lost anyone close to him. Leon hesitated at first, but then he began to open up and tell her how he was really close with a guy he knew since elementary school, but how he felt he betrayed him after they graduated high school by not putting him on with his connection that would have gave him access to making a lot of money and thinking free outfits, being treated to lunch or dinner, and letting him drive his old car was supposed to be enough. Leon went on to say he was killed in a robbery after being beat and suffocated with a plastic bag over his head, but said that he didn't feel sorry for him because of how they were supposed to be brothers, but he left him behind. Shannon went back to tell Ace about the conversation. Ace then said, "No one ever said he was suffocated or had a plastic bag over his head, they only said he was beat to death." He figured if this were true, Leon had to know more than he told the detectives based on their statements to the media. Ace had Shannon make an anonymous call to the precinct to mention the conversation she had with Leon. When they tried to ask her for more identifying information, she just hung up the phone, but they had enough to know she was on to something since they had never released that piece of information to the public or to family about Brandon being suffocated with a bag over his head. They purposely let on as if he was only beat to death. Detectives and officers immediately went to Leon's house where he still lived with his mother with a search warrant and an arrest warrant. They put Leon in handcuffs and packed up almost everything in his bedroom, took it out in boxes and brown paper bags. Then the lab meticulously combed through the clothes, shoes, jewelry, and other items while Leon was in the interrogation room. The detective asked Leon how did his best friend die? Leon loudly responded, "You already questioned me about this man. I told you I know what everybody else knows. He was beat and suffocated with a plastic bag over his head." The detectives then asked him how did he find out about Brandon being suffocated since it wasn't in the news? He said Brandon's parents told him, The detective told Leon to come again because that information was never released to anyone, not even Brandon's parents. Leon then told the detective he wanted an attorney. The lab technician phoned the detective to inform him that Leon's watch had dried blood in between the crevices of the links. Leon was immediately officially booked for probable cause of murder. While Leon sat in jail, since he was unable to post bail, a case was building against him. The blood testing returned a few weeks later and it was positive for Brandon's DNA. He was unable to explain how Brandon's blood got in the crevices of his watch when Brandon was not bleeding when they left the party, and if he said he was dropped off after the party never to see Brandon again, why did he fail to mention any injury Brandon sustained that would have caused him to bleed? The detective called Brandon's parents to inform him that they have one of Brandon's killers. The parents asked who it was, and was told Leon Payne. They were in disbelief. They asked the detectives if they were sure and assured them Leon would not be involved in such a thing. The detective informed Brandon's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Commons, that Leon knew a detail they purposely left out to ensure they had the killer or someone who knew the killers if that piece of information was ever mentioned. Brandon's parents were hit with a triple whammy after learning their son's best friend was one of the murderers. He was suffocated with a plastic bag over his head on top of being beaten to death. and after learning the watch that blood was found in between the links of was the nice timepiece Brandon purchased for Leon as a just because gift, the district attorney offered Leon a deal after okaying it with Brandon's parents of shaving off 10 years of his 30-year sentence he was seeking if he gave up the other two unidentified men involved. Leon sang like a nightingale and the other two men were brought to justice after a thorough investigation. The parents figured that was a small price to pay to ensure all involved were punished for killing their beloved son, and Ace felt a weight lifted off his chest by knowing he helped Brandon post-mortem, since he felt partially responsible for introducing him to the fast flashy lifestyle that caused him to be a magnet for, as it turns out, robbery and death. He also felt he went about it in the best way to avoid any heat or interference with his street enterprise that he had plans on flipping to a legit business. Words of wisdom: it is never worth it to choose the path of a dangerous lifestyle, no matter how fun and fabulous it seems. It is highly likely that it will be short-lived and be met with dire consequences.